My name's Richard Jones, Editorial Director at Devex, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Robert Opp, who's Chief Digital Officer at UNDP. Robert, first of all, welcome, and many thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you, and greetings from a kind of construction season Manhattan.
No, that's great, thanks, and yeah, really good for you to join us today. Now, from your perspective as Chief Digital Officer at UNDP, what would you say is the potential of digital technology to advance progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals? And which digital inclusive solutions are you really most excited about?
Yeah, so we look well, first let me explain. At the United Nations Development Program, we're essentially the development arm of the United Nations system, and we work in 170 countries worldwide to support them in achieving their national development goals. And when we look at the global sustainable development goals, we see that progress has not been as strong as we'd like, particularly because of the COVID pandemic. And so we're looking for ways that we can always accelerate and enable faster and better development for people. And for us, digital technology is really one of those big accelerants that we look at. There's no question that the power of technology is increasing and the pace of evolution of technology is increasing. And so we want to be able to be sure that we are embracing that and bringing it to our work. So there's many answers to your question, and I'll try to keep it really brief, but of course we're excited about different individual technologies, whether it be the power of artificial intelligence or blockchain or even just advanced analytics and so on. But when we look at this, we have to look at it in terms of the applications and what it means for people in their daily lives. And so the power of connecting someone to the internet and making available new services, whether it be financial services that they could not access before but able to now access from their device, or telehealth or telemedicine, as we saw so important during the pandemic. There's just a huge range of applications that we look at and ways that we're trying to understand how to best apply digital technology to improve people's lives.
And can you tell us a little bit about your work with the EDISON Alliance and give us a sense of how the Alliance's priorities, some of which you just mentioned, health, education, finance, how are they intersecting with your work at UNDP?
Well, the EDISON Alliance is really about how do we include people to be able really to participate in the digital economy. And so it's very aligned with what we look at as an organization. In fact, our digital strategy, we have one for UNDP, and it sets out a vision that we seek to help create a world in which digital is an empowering force for people and planet. And that is very close to the EDISON Alliance sort of driving interest in trying to allow every person to participate in the digital economy. So our approach to this and the EDISON Alliance approach is very similar. What I would say is what EDISON Alliance really brings is this multi-stakeholder platform. So we as a UN agency, we can provide a certain amount of support for our country partners and our civil society partners around the world. But we know, particularly when it comes to digital technology, we cannot do that without partnership and participation from stakeholders like private sector companies, whether they be telco or health insurance operators, government partners, other civil society organizations, other international organizations. And the EDISON Alliance is really a platform that brings those voices together and tries to channel and organize the responses and commitments that we've all made in ways that will unlock and amplify what we all do.
So it's the power of the collective. I just wanted to ask you about the key steps to overcoming some of these barriers to digital inclusion. And from a UNDP perspective, what are some of the main barriers that you've identified and that you're working on?
Right. So digital inclusion is, it's a very broad term, but and I think some people kind of equate it with pure connectivity, but that's really not the story here. So we know that infrastructure and getting people connections is important, but we have to think about, are they able to use those connections effectively? Are they able to actually afford it? So we look at, in addition to kind of ensuring that people live within coverage areas, we need to be sure that people have the skills and capacities to use technologies. We need to be sure that they're able to afford both the devices and the airtime that's necessary to use them. We need to make sure that they're in an environment where there's safety online, safety from or protection from harassment or abuses of people's rights. And then really importantly, we need to make sure that there's a whole ecosystem of productive services that people are able to access. So in other words, what's the point of having a device and having airtime, but not having those financial services that I mentioned before to access, or government services available to interact with, or being able to purchase health insurance with your connection. So it's really a rounded kind of effort when we talk about digital inclusion, and one that goes far beyond just infrastructure.
Now, the EDISON Alliance's 1 Billion Lives Challenge aims to address digital inclusion barriers, aims to improve the lives of 1 billion people by 2025, primarily through affordable, accessible solutions across health, education, finance. What are some of the key impacts that you've seen since the launch of this challenge?
I think certainly what we've seen is a kind of gathering of the different activities that people are working on. So that's really important, because oftentimes efforts are really fragmented out there and we don't know who's doing what. So getting everybody's kind of activities and commitments together, and then kind of challenging each other to do more, is a really important part of EDISON. But beyond that, there's, I think, connections that are being made between organizations. And I can speak maybe to one connection that we've been involved in directly, which is, we've been looking at how can we really get more information about digital inclusion strategies and best practices out to decision makers around the world, particularly government policymakers, but also beyond. And so we came together with the World Economic Forum, who of course, hosts the EDISON Alliance, the Boston Consulting Group, and UNDP. And as a group, we looked at building a platform that we call the Digital Navigator, the Digital Inclusion Navigator, I should say, which is a platform where we're able to collect best practices and experiences in digital inclusion. And we've brought in experiences from organizations like UNICEF and the World Bank, the ITU, as well as companies that are working on these things, and trying to make them available in a usable way and widely accessible for policymakers around the world. So that's just sort of one example of a kind of connection that was made, and a new platform that now exists that wouldn't have otherwise.
And looking ahead, what's the next frontier for the Alliance and UNDP's role within that Alliance?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit about, we're sort of kind of halfway on that sort of 1 billion lives. And we've already sort of asked ourselves, well, do we need to go beyond 1 billion? So there's a discussion to be had there, and I'm not sure exactly what we as a platform will decide. But the important thing is that we're starting to forge new ways of working together, that we're finding at a country level where we can bring together these different experiences and capacities and commitments that have been made, so that at a country level, we're starting to really make a difference. So I think that's definitely a direction that we'll go in. And I think, beyond that, it's a matter of kind of looking at, what else do we need to do? We've focused on health, financial inclusion, education, but do we need to go beyond that? There's a bit of discussion around, shall we include other sectors as well? And then one that I'm particularly interested in is that we've started this initiative around affordability. And I think a really interesting and important aspect of affordability around digital inclusion is, what are the new kinds of business models that we can actually create? Again, potentially as multi-stakeholder groups, but also as individual companies and service providers. But what are the new business models that can target people who are at lower income levels, who are maybe kind of newly joined to the internet, and really trying to kind of reach them with important and critical services that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And I think that's where we're going to get a lot of acceleration of development when it comes to what we're talking about here, what's important in reaching these sustainable development goals.
And in terms of your work with specific countries, could you walk us through the Lighthouse Country Initiative and your role within that?
Yes, so the Lighthouse Initiative is really, it's kind of what I was just describing. How do we bring this to a country, and how do we make these things available at a country level? So we can talk about global commitments, but they're going to stay global unless we can land them. And so we pick an individual country. And so, one of the ones that we've already done is Rwanda. We also are really, honored to have the presence of Her Excellency Minister Paula Ingabire as a board member of the EDISON Alliance. So she volunteered Rwanda as one of the first lighthouse countries. And it's really about kind of holding a sort of set of multi-stakeholder dialogues in the country and bringing the global players and the local players together and saying, what can we commit to locally to really move the needle when it comes to development in this particular context? So it's something that we're looking at. How do we replicate and do in other places? We've already got a pipeline of countries that we're looking at, and we're excited to see what will happen.
Robert, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.